Hello, welcome to Performance Anxiety. We analyse the film, television, theatre and comedy performances that everybody is talking about. I'm Alex Dale, and with me is my resident film expert,
Dr. Maren Tom.
Welcome to Season 2 of Performance Anxiety, everybody.
Woohoo!
It's nice to be back.
Hello, hello, hello.
I was going to say bigger and better, but it's exactly the same size.
We moved the microphones.
You will hear some slightly better eye contact.
That is lovely.
So this episode is going to be a little different from some of our previous episodes in that we want to talk about a performer rather than a performance. And we want to talk especially about...
Pedro Pascal.
Ooh, shivers.
The daddy.
The daddy, exactly. So we want to get into why he is the daddy. He's a phenomenon at the moment, without a doubt.
He is huge. He's
everywhere.
He's everywhere. He's probably the biggest star at the moment.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about and a lot to unpick, and we need to get into it now. There may be some people out there who don't know who Pedro Pascal is. He's been around for a long time, but a quick summary of his CV, his most recent hits.
Well, he's been around for some time,
Yes.
but he is in his late 40s and he just reached a kind of fame and recognition. Not just fame,
Yes.
but recognition.
And this is part of what we
Yeah.
want to explore. So his CV is like this. His breakthrough role, I think, that put him on the map as a performer was in Game of Thrones in 2014, where he played the Red Viper, Oberyn Martell. After that, he was in Narcos from 2015 to 2017. Then his massive role was in The Mandalorian, where he was the Mandalorian. That's 2019 to present day. And at the moment, he's in The Last of Us. As you say, he's only recently become a massive star phenomenon. He's in his late 40s. And that's part of this phenomenon we want to explore.
Yes, he's been around for some time. And of course, as soon as he became famous, his fans dug up all this kind of, where does he come from? And so they dug up all his old roles that he played before. And they came across a very early role he played in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So he played a bit part where he was a college student who falls in love with Buffy and, of course, turns into a vampire and needs to be killed by her. And then he was did bit parts in TV series and, was a working actor in Hollywood. But as you say, he became then famous through this one casting in Game of Thrones.
So our big question for this episode is, what is it that Pedro Pascal is performing that people are picking up on and enjoying? What's he putting out there? What is this phenomenon?
Yes, I mean, the phenomenon is probably mostly triggered by the fact that he's this internet phenomenon. So what he has become a phenomenon of is what they call in TikTok parlor, fan cam.
TikTok, eh?
Yes. So the idea of fan cams comes probably from K-pop in Korea, where fans make little sort of Insta movies or TikTok movies and mash up their little films about their stars, usually live on stage. But, and then they use the technology of the apps to make little 30-second movies of their stars. So fan fiction, but in kind of little movies.
So it's a hybrid between fan fiction, I guess, but maybe a poster that you would put on your wall or a postcard or that kind of thing. It's a way of idolizing somebody.
It's a way fans create the star meaning for themselves. So what stars mean for them.
Nice. And now he's attracting an extraordinary amount of this kind of heat.
It's absolutely insane the way he is being idolized on TikTok and Instagram. For example, the hashtag Pedro Pascal edit has subscribers that is around 2.3 billion. Right? That's insane numbers.
I can't even comprehend.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the worldwide phenomenon of Pedro Pascal is he is huge. And one of the things that he's quite famous for is that the internet community or the fan community has dubbed him the daddy.
Now then, this is what we need to get into is, what is this archetype? What is this role artistically that he is fulfilling?
So I think because he became famous as soon as he started growing the mustache for the role in Game of Thrones. It is about facial hair.
You think this is important?
I think so, massively so. There's a way he can wear a mustache that is phenomenal. Literally phenomenal.
Yeah.
It gives an impression of a kind of man that, brings about a certain way of doing things. And it's not ironic. He evokes the kind of old Hollywood stars of Errol Flynn and Clark Gable and Burt Reynolds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Selleck.
Men's men.
Yeah, men's men who don't take no shit, who have control of the situation. You remember Tom Selleck, he was the kind of daddy figure for Courtney Cox and Friends, right? He fulfills this role, this kind of Oedipal desire. And the mustache plays a big part in this because he is beyond a kind of lumbersexual, people who wear mustaches for ironic reasons. Or
Hipsters.
Hipsters.
Yeah. What used to be called hipsters.
Or people, who do Movember and, it's...
Movember is real and it cures cancer. Carry on.
But it is a kind of man who should wear a mustache because it gives him the kind of aura and authority that we want to see in him.
So how does this manifest itself in the roles? What do you think it's doing to his performances in Game of Thrones, Narcos, The Mandalorian, and so on?
Well, obviously, the idea of daddy is directly related to the roles he plays. So in Narcos, when he first started reaching, became a household name, the first thing he does is rescue a woman from a drugs cartel in a kind of real macho way. So he's a macho without the kind of associated sexism around it. Mm-hmm. And it becomes it establishes this character as a kind of really nurturing but also ruthless guy who can bring down Escobar.
So he's protective, he's parental.
Yes.
But not necessarily demeaning towards women.
Absolutely. No, he still carries with him a kind of Latin machismo, but without the bad
Without
bits.
any sexism.
Yeah. The next role he plays is, of course, the Mandalorian, the reluctant dad.
Now, I have to ask you here, he's wearing a helmet.
Yes.
Can you act mustache through helmet? If you know what I mean.
I think the helmet is sort of an extended mustache, isn't it? So but quite phallic, isn't it?
Does that make it a mustache?
We've committed to the Freudianism in this episode with the daddy thing, so we're going to go the whole way. But he does take it off as well. When he speaks to his kind of...
The helmet, not the mustache.
When he speaks to his adopted son, the little Grogu.
Yes.
And he's, of course, reluctant. He wants to get rid of him at first. And then he just takes him along and becomes his kind of mentor. In every episode, he goes from place to place, helps the oppressed, because that's what Mandalorians do. But reluctantly, because actually they do it for money. Mm. But he can't help himself but to be protective.
This is the important thing, yes. Isn't it? He has this conscience that is pure almost.
Yeah, so
he's not cynical.
No, he cannot help himself but to protect the helpless. And then, of course, this is a neat transition to The Last of Us, where he basically plays the same part.
So he's a down-to-earth guy, a working-class guy with a working-class job.
Yeah, he wears jeans and flannel shirts,
yes.
But not ironically.
He's not a lumbersexual.
No,
he's a real working-class guy with a construction job, I think, and a truck.
And there is, he has to look after this kid, first of all, reluctantly, but his inner drive is to look after this child and to protect it. And that's the kind of way that we now see him, as this sexy daddy. He will look after us.
And that's coming across in the fandom, right?
Yes. Obviously, there is a kind of trauma that's happened to a generation or to all of us in the past 6 years. The political turmoils after 2016, mm-hmm. Then COVID hits. I think people feel that there's nobody in charge. Nobody takes people by the hand. Everything feels chaotic, right? And so films now are about this kind of chaos that we live in and how to get through this. And here comes this person who wasn't there during COVID, your father, the father figure that we all want, who will, look after us. And that was the kind of role that he played in his own Saturday Night Live sketch, when he plays a teacher who gets admired by his students who have been through COVID and project all their kind of trauma onto their teacher and make these kind of fan movies about him. And similarly, probably he's now symbolizes all our trauma, that we all need a daddy.
Wow. The question, I think, is how does this compare to leading men from the past? Because they've always been idolized. They've always had massive stardom and so on. Do you think that there's anything different, especially about Pedro Pascal, in the way that his stardom works and his persona operates?
So in the way that he's different to Burt Reynolds, for example.
Yeah, Burt Reynolds or any of the other mustachioed heroes that you mentioned, Errol Flynn or
Yes.
Clark Gable.
So the idea that, that there's a death of leading men has been around for a while. The idea that there are no more leading men in sort of literature and newspaper reports around 2012, 13, the idea that men are over was kind of widely discussed, and especially the idea that there are no more leading men. So there are several famous articles that say, where are the leading men?
And we're talking about life in general, but in film especially, right?
So a complete lack of leading men. And it wasn't because they wouldn't exist. So in the 90s, this new generation of could become leading men was already sort of being
They were on the up and up.
Yeah, they were on the up and up. If you remember people like Johnny Depp, Keanu Reeves, Brad Pitt, Robert Downey Jr., this kind of
Clooney, I guess.
Yeah, those are kind of, the Brat Pack.
Yeah.
Not the Rat Pack, but the Brat Pack. They were very famous in the 90s. But you would assume that they would then develop, 10 years later, that they would become Hollywood's leading men.
Mm-hmm.
Especially people like Johnny Depp. And that hasn't happened, and the question is, are there just no leading men, and is George Clooney the only one we have? That has always been touted about in the last 20 years, we still have George Clooney. But the problem was that there were no films that wanted the classic leading men. So all these actors in the noughties had to take on roles that were not classic leading men roles. Johnny Depp famously just became a pirate clown. Right, yeah, that's all he was ever do after
in
this.
Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously.
So he would do that for the next 15 years, and then he would die the death of the Lone Ranger.
What a way to go out, and on a high.
It's tragic, but or even Robert Downey Jr., he became Iron Man, so they became comic book characters.
They became parodies of men, really.
Parodies of men. Hugh Jackman, and then the only men that were available were comic book men. So all the leading actors in Hollywood had to sort of protein shake up. Every
Yeah.
And they all looked what do you call this? Sinewy and muscly, and they became parodies of men. And culminating, of course, in our favorite, The Rock, who looks like he is now a cartoon character.
Yes, he looks like walnuts stuffed in a condom. Yeah.
The classic. But, these are kind of men fantasies that are childish fantasies.
This is interesting because, of course, Pedro Pascal famously has dad bod, which is ridiculous because he's still a slender, well put together guy. He's just not a caricature of a man.
He looks like a normal guy, even quite fit. He has to survive the apocalypse. So yeah. The most interesting of this whole phenomenon of Pedro Pascal is that people don't seem to want a superhero to save them anymore. They don't want Superman. They want a dad. They want somebody who is somewhat real, somebody who will actually do something for you and be there in the long run. And here we come to the phenomenon that Pedro Pascal is not a movie star. He is a television star.
Now, why is that distinction important?
Because the structure of movies is fundamentally different to that of television series. In a movie, you usually go from A to C, B being the kind of dramatic arc. So it is a journey. So you start with an equilibrium that gets disturbed, something happens, climax, it gets resolved, and then you end up with the same kind of equilibrium, just a little bit better or different. So it is an arc. It's a 3-act, 5-act structure.
depending on which theory you tend to subscribe to.
Yeah, exactly. And, it lends itself to hero films. It's a hero's journey. That's what they do. They
So the
start
character transforms over the period of this arc.
very much so. But television works differently. It continues. It's there. The character can go back and forth, develop. Other characters can come in. So it's a character study. So television is really good for characters. Movies are really good for stories.
Can I be really crass?
Yeah.
So Ricky Gervais, of all people, said, film is beginning, middle and end, and television is all middle. But I think what he was,
Yeah.
in his own way, was describing exactly this phenomenon, right? So it's about, the duration and exploration of character in television as opposed to story in film, right?
Very much so. And so we have the desire for somebody who is more constant. We know that heroes come and go, but daddies are forever.
You're really freaking me out on this episode. Now, the question, I guess, is how long can he endure? If his archetype is about an enduring parental figure, unfortunately, life does change. Circumstances change. Roles change. All of life is changed, right? How long can Pedro Pascal fulfill our daddy needs, our daddy wish fulfillment?
I think there is, of course, 3 ways this can go. He can just say, stop, no more daddy, I'm going to quit all of this.
So he could be an artist and say, I'm sick of being typecast.
Could happen because, the next film that's coming out with Pedro Pascal is the Almodovar film that he does with Ethan Hawke.
Mm-hmm.
So in which apparently is an answer to Brokeback Mountain.
Okay. Well, one of the things that makes him useful as a cipher is his ambiguity in so many ways.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him very versatile. So he's sexually ambiguous, and I don't mean in bed. I mean, you don't know if he's gay or straight or whatever. And I think they've deliberately nurtured this degree of ambiguity. He is ethnically ambiguous, for want of a better term. He can play Mediterranean, right? So the important point is, though, that his ambiguity is playing to his strength at this point.
Yes, and the fact that he has had this long life that was shielded from the public view. So he wasn't a famous star when he was very young, where his life became out in the open. No, it was very shielded, and that's really to his advantage. So he's an unknown quantity. So, but that could also become the second problem, how this all could end, right? So he could say, no, stop, I'm just going to do art house films from now on and no more daddy. Mm-hmm. It could become undone very easily if something comes up that destroys this image of Pedro Pascal, that he is not trustworthy as a father anymore. What's more traumatic for a little girl when her father does something bad?
So he could...
Well, this is Freudian speaking, so society will be more traumatized, by finding out.
Yes, to learn that he...
I don't know. He could go full Kevin Spacey. Who knows?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be. In fact, that probably would be if he was kind of Me Too'd.
Yeah.
That would absolutely crush that archetype.
Yeah, I don't think
it would be the
will.
worst. Betrayal of his archetype. He won't be.
No. I think he's. He gives off the same vibe as Keanu Reeves, of genuinely a nice
as far as we know,
to be around. But who knows? So that's the way it could end. But I think the most likely way this whole thing will end is that we don't need a daddy anymore. As a society moves on, we look for different leading men. The same way years ago we stopped needing old Hollywood leading men and completely abandoned in favor of superheroes. We could abandon the idea of a kind of mustachioed but Reynoldsy kind of daddy. Because, people take responsibility for themselves again. They see this is the kind of thing we have to do. There's clarity, there's more coherence in the world. Who knows?
So the important thing there, I guess, is that we need a daddy because we are infantilized. We feel out of control. We feel unprotected, vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Basically, we get over ourselves, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Or we get a grip.
Well, we grow up.
Yeah.
That's the formula. You know, the society is just going to get a grip and doesn't despair at the chaos or that the world is presenting at the moment. We just get a grip, pull our big boy pants on, and
Freudian.
yeah, and imagine a future.
So our question at the beginning of this episode is, what is Pedro Pascal performing that people are enjoying and picking up on? And I think we've answered that question. He's fulfilling a kind of father figure.
A Freudian father figure. People are libidinally invested in him. You know, he's not a father, he's a daddy.
All right. So he will continue being a daddy, a mystery and a mustache, as long as we feel libidinally invested, or until he buys a razor.
Very much so.
Thank you for listening to Performance Anxiety. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We'll be back soon. Until then, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to us and it helps boost the show. Till next time.
Tasha, you're giving me performance anxiety.